Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale. Today, I have a very special episode for you guys. Now, two of the most common questions that I get, especially on Twitter, are one, where is Jason? What's he up to? And two, where is Zed? What is Zed up to? Zed, for those of you who don't know, was a reoccurring name at the top of the global leaderboard, especially early on in the game. He went into retirement for a while, but he is back now, and he's playing this account that I'm going to be sharing replays with you guys today. He is currently #1 in the entire world, and he hopes to end the season in that #1 spot. Coincidentally, Jason also back in the game, but he's not playing too often. At least it's hard for me to get in contact with him. But for today, we have Zed back, and I am super excited to share with you his Hog Cycle deck, and we're really going to get into the strategy of this deck. We're going to be focusing on 5 main points as we watch his awesome replays against other players at the top of the global leaderboard. Now, there are thousands of people in the game with maxed out accounts, so don't think it's easy just because you have a maxed account that you're going to automatically be really high up on the leaderboards, let alone #1 in the world. So the account that he's playing now is at the top of your screen. It's called Fourteenloving, so be on the lookout. I have no idea what that name means. I don't even know if I want to know exactly. But anyway, so he's playing the Hog Cycle deck, or traditional deck. He's, known for his being a stellar Hog Cycle player. And he reached out to me and he said, you know what, Ash, I'm back in the game. I'm doing really well, especially with this Hog deck. So what I'd like to do is share with you and your viewers some replays against other archetypes in the meta, and also talk about why I feel this deck really withstands the test of time when it comes to the current meta. Some decks, they kind of come and they go based on the win condition, but the Hog Rider has always been a staple of the game since day one. The Hog Rider's not going anywhere, guys, so learning to play a deck like this is a very important tool to have in your arsenal. So let's get to the tips. You're going to see some excellent gameplay. The one thing about Zed, if you remember this back in the day, is that he just doesn't make mistakes. He's just so textbook. He kind of reminds me in that regard of Sushi Pepe. I think those are two of the most fundamental players just in terms of not making mistakes. Darth Jar Jar's another guy in terms of just always playing things in the right location at the right time and knowing when your opponent is low or high or equal to you in Elixir. So let's get to the tips, because I asked him 5 major questions about this deck, and we're going to cover all of these in this episode today. #1 is, do you play this deck extra aggressive, extra passive, or somewhere in the middle, or does it depend on what your opponent has? His answer might surprise you. #2, I asked him the role of the Hog Rider in this deck, depending on the archetype you're going against. Are you always just looking for that one spot to sneak in the Hog, or are you playing with a different tempo depending on the deck you're going against? #3, I asked, what is your most lethal win condition combination? Is it just the Hog Rider going in here and there, or is it comboing him with the Musketeer in certain scenarios? Are you trying to get a big counter push with the Hog Rider, or is it just chipping away with the Hog Rider throughout the match? Question #4, I asked, what is the role of the Rocket, and how often are you using the Rocket offensively versus defensively in this deck? And lastly, the final question, what are the most common mistakes that you see other players making when they play this deck? So let's get to the answers to these questions, and then we'll just have some fun, kind of, relax and watch some of the gameplay. I'll do a little play-by-play, and we'll just try to, see how Zed works the magic that he's so known for. So let me turn on a second replay here. He gave me plenty of them. And the first question. So again, it was this deck versus different archetypes. How are you playing it differently? And he said, with this deck, you have to take advantage of the cheap cycle. No matter what type of deck you're playing against, you're really relying heavily on the cycle potential of this deck. So every Hog attack doesn't need to be the winning attack. For example, versus a Zap Bait deck, you want to use your first Hog just to take out the Furnace and not focus too heavily on getting tower damage. Then you can outcycle your opponent, get that second Hog onto the tower before the bait opponent, has a chance to cycle back to their Furnace. So that is the game. That's the whole name of the game with any cycle deck, especially a Hog Cycle deck. It's called Cycle for a reason. It's very fast, and it's it's not just cycling for your own, fun and enjoyment. It's trying to out-cycle the opponent's counter to your win condition. So basically, against any archetype, you're going to be using your Hog Rider, especially right off the bat, to ascertain what the opponent's counter is, and then you can kind of build your second wave. Your second push is where you really want to do your damage. And you know what, guys? That's actually a useful tip that you can take with you into every match, regardless of what deck that you're playing, right? Because if you ever go against a Hog Rider player, especially a skilled one, you should be aware that that's what they're trying to do to you as well. So they're going to try to vet out whatever your best counter is right off the bat, and then they're going to come back at you and hopefully, well, not hopefully for you, but hopefully for them, they're going to outcycle you. So you have to be very careful of that. So moving on to question number 2. So, aggressive versus passive in terms of the tempo of this deck. So Zed said that he likes to play this deck pretty aggressively, especially in terms of the cycle that we just talked about, outcycling your opponent before they can get to your counter. So in order to do that, you have to play aggressively because you have to play 4 cards to get your Hog Rider back in your hand. On top of that, though, he said there were some passive plays that people could make towards the beginning of the game to try to feel out your opponent and not start super aggressive with the Hog as your very first play if you have it in your hand. And that is, the common passive play that almost every deck that has her in it is, and that is the Musketeer behind your King Tower. So that would be the passive play to start things out, and you can always reset at any time during the match if things are just not going your way, or you want to take a step back and kind of realign your cycle. Maybe your opponent's taking advantage of you and you want to just kind of reload. Go ahead and just put the Musketeer behind your King Tower, take a deep breath, and try to reevaluate the arena, okay? So question number 3 was, what is the main offensive combination that gets you the win more often than not? And he said it really depends on what type of deck he's going against or what opportunities he has in the match. Sometimes it's just a solid Hog push after a Musketeer defense where you're able to drop down that Ice Golem, tank for the Musketeer, and then slip in that Hog Rider, and you have basically the new trifecta, the old trifecta with the Valkyrie, which he was known for early on, and now it's just the Ice Golem in that spot in the deck. So that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously, besides that big offensive push with the Musketeer, he said, just chipping away with the Hog throughout the match. So that would be, his go-to, is you're waiting to outcycle. Once you do on that second wave, that's where all your damage is going to come from, besides those really big pushes. Number 4, I asked him about the Rocket. Now, he said the Rocket came back, and this is obvious, but also useful knowledge, right? So the Rocket came back into the meta in a big way, and the reason being because people started playing pumps again. Man, pumps made a comeback. So now that pumps are back in the game, you rocket the pump right away. If the opponent makes a mistake and puts their elixir pump near their tower, you can get free damage, a lot of free damage. They put out an insane amount of damage, especially at max level here on the top of the leaderboards. It's crazy. It's, over 600 HP off a tower with a max rocket. It's insane. So if your opponent makes that mistake of putting their elixir pump next to their tower, their crown tower, you can make them pay. Talk about punishing your opponent, right? But other than that, if your opponent's not playing an elixir pump, the only really aggressive move that Zed does with the Rocket is actually just using it to take out elite barbarians, if he can play it as a predictive play with a Hog Rider, which is a difficult thing to do because of the incredibly long blast duration or time till it hits the target that the Rocket has. So that's pretty much it with the Rocket. It's pretty simple. He uses it mainly defensively other than that. So offensively, at the end of the match, take down that final HP. Otherwise, he's going to mainly save it for defense. He's going to use it against 3 Musketeers if they split them in the back. Obviously, if you can catch 2 Musketeers and the tower with a Rocket, that's great value. So it's all about value with the Rocket. But moving right into the common mistakes, because it really does tie in with this, the number 1 common mistake would be throwing out Rockets just way too often. Remember, this is a cycle deck, so if you have an elixir advantage, and Zed was really emphasized this to me. He said, if you have have an elixir advantage, it's not really a license to throw out a rocket randomly just for a bunch of damage. It's really a license to play your deck faster and then get right back to your Hog Cycle. So it shouldn't be, if you're throwing out a bunch of offensive rockets because you keep picking up an elixir advantage, you're probably playing the deck incorrectly according to ZED. ZED, as I said, mainly you're going to use the rocket in a pinch defensively or to finish off the game or to get value out of the rocket. If you have that rocket, you can see that's a good value right there on the screen. But if you're using the rocket in any other way, you're probably just not cycling fast enough back to your Hog Rider. Instead, you're probably playing the deck too passively. So now that's pretty much the answer to those 5 questions I told you guys about at the beginning of the episode. Let's go ahead and watch a match just to have some fun and just kind of do a play-by-play. It's been a while since I've just kind of, not given pro tips the entire episode. Instead, just focused on one particular match. So here we go. Zed again on the top, and he's going against a giant beatdown deck with Elite Barbarians and Musketeer. We'll see the rest of the deck, but it's a pretty common beatdown deck standard in the current meta, which is kind of shifting right now, but still, I don't think these decks will be going anywhere. So here comes the Musketeer by the opponent there, first play behind the Giant. So right off the bat here, a giant push, but you can see Zed just cycled in the beginning, so he has plenty of elixir to deal with this push. He's going to play his Ice Golem to distract that Musketeer. Also did a good job killing those supporting minions in there with the Ice Golem death damage as well as that Zap spell. And look at that, he actually did a decent amount of damage with just the skeletons and the Ice Golem that he played at the very beginning of this match on that left tower of the opponent. Oh, and check it out right here, Rocket versus Elixir Collector. So why are you always making that trade? It's a 6-for-6 trade, so you're not making any elixir gains or advantages out of that trade, but what you're doing is you're stopping the opponent from doing something that their deck is built on. This guy's deck is built on getting the elixir advantage and then cashing in with a big beatdown push, and you're stopping them from ever being able to do that because you're taking away that advantage that's really built into their deck. That's why you always rocket down the elixir pumps. So here comes another defense, this time with the Elite Barbarians. What he's going to do is slow down the Elite Barbarians with the Ice Golem, distract the Giant with the cannon, and there it is, the defensive rocket. Now granted, the Musketeer is going to get a few shots on that tower, but he was able to stop that Musketeer using the Ice Golem from doing even more damage. So now we're resetting again, and it's noteworthy here that almost 2 minutes into this match, Zed's basically been playing defense the entire time. This time when that Elixir Collector goes down, he's ready with the Hog Rider, so he's doing a little bit more damage, uses the Zap spell, gets another swing in there with the Hog. Now the opponent has gained 1 elixir out of that pump, so it's no longer good value to use the rocket against it. Of course, the rocket was not back into rotation at that time, but now we're going to see how Zed deals with a big push coming his way. So a Fireball Zap, that's 5 elixir, but he did do damage with both the direct damage spells to the tower as well. So here comes a little push here for Zed. Now Elite Barbarians are, oh look at this, what a predictive rocket that was. We talked about how difficult that could be, and Zed pulls it off there. Using the predictive offensive rocket, not fireball, with the Hog Rider, able to take down that left tower with that combo, and that sometimes is what the game comes down to. Having that one big predictive play is what separates an average player from an above average and even expert player like Zed certainly is. So that was an amazing combo to finish that match. Oh, and he tries to take out his own bridge with the rocket. True or false? 25 rockets can take out a bridge. Okay, joking guys. But guys, we're gonna wrap it up here. Thanks so much to Zed for sharing his deck and his tips with you guys and me. Really appreciate you guys watching. Thanks so much, and as always, take care, guys.